My husband left me home to wash the dishes while he took his mistress to the year's biggest charity gala. Neither of them realized the mysterious billionaire chairwoman they were desperate to impress was the wife they had humiliated for 8 years, and that I secretly owned the company, the mansion, and the future of his entire business empire. Part 1: The Night They Never Saw Coming. The crystal serving bowl didn't fall by accident. It slipped from Giselle Prescott's hands the moment her mother-in-law brushed past her shoulder without so much as an apology. The bowl crashed onto the polished kitchen floor, shattering into dozens of sparkling pieces around her feet. Dinner was ready. The roasted salmon had just come out of the oven. The vegetables were still warm. Fresh flowers stood in a silver vase at the center of the dining table. Every place setting had been arranged exactly the way Fiona Clayton had demanded. Yet Fiona slowly looked around the room as though Giselle had ruined the entire evening. "You've lived with this family for nearly 8 years," she said, smoothing the front of her pale gold evening gown, "and somehow you still manage to make everything feel ordinary." She let out a quiet sigh. Some women simply never learn elegance. Without saying a word, Giselle knelt down and carefully began collecting the broken crystal. Her husband, Philip Clayton, stood near the kitchen doorway, scrolling through messages on his phone. He wore a perfectly tailored midnight blue tuxedo, handmade leather shoes, and the silver watch Giselle had given him on their 3rd wedding anniversary. Whenever reporters interviewed Philip about his success, he proudly claimed he had bought that watch after closing his first major property development deal. Giselle had never corrected the story. "Clean that up before someone steps on it," Philip said without even looking at her. The household staff already went home. Giselle quietly placed one of the larger crystal pieces on the counter. Then she looked at him. "I thought I was going with you tonight." For the first time, Philip raised his eyes. He stared at her for several seconds, as if he had completely forgotten she expected to attend. That evening's Gala was the most important charity and business event of the year in Monterey. The celebration was being held inside a beautifully restored waterfront hotel. Investors, healthcare executives, architects, community leaders, business owners, journalists, guests had traveled from across the country to attend. But everyone was talking about one person in particular, the mysterious founder of Vane Stafford Capital. The private investment company had quietly funded hospitals, affordable housing, educational programs, and environmentally responsible developments worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Almost no one knew what the founder looked like. Even fewer knew where the billionaire lived. Philip adjusted one of his cufflinks. "This event is important for the company." "I know," Giselle answered softly. "No," he replied, his voice growing colder. "I don't think you do. There will be photographers. I'll be speaking with people who expect a certain image." His eyes slowly moved over her simple dress. "I can't afford distractions tonight." The words hung in the air. Fiona gave an approving smile but said nothing. Giselle understood exactly what they meant. After 8 years of marriage, her husband no longer saw her as his partner, only as someone who belonged in the kitchen after everyone else had left. She lowered her eyes. "All right," she said quietly. "I'll stay." Philip nodded as though the matter had been settled. Without another word, he picked up his car keys. Moments later, he walked out the front door with his mother, leaving his wife alone beside the broken crystal. Neither of them noticed the small smile that slowly appeared on Giselle's face, because neither of them knew the truth. The billionaire chairwoman they were desperately hoping to impress that evening was already on the guest list, and she wasn't arriving as anyone's wife. She was arriving as the woman who owned Vane Stafford Capital, the company Philip had spent years trying to win over. She also owned the mansion Philip proudly called his family home. She owned the investment portfolio that quietly financed nearly every expansion of his business, and before the night was over, she would decide whether his entire empire still had a future. The front door clicked shut. Silence settled over the mansion. For several long seconds, Giselle remained exactly where she was, still kneeling beside the broken crystal, still wearing the simple dress Philip had dismissed as unworthy. Then she smiled, not because she had been insulted, because the waiting was finally over. She placed the last piece of crystal into the trash and walked upstairs. Inside the master bedroom, she opened a hidden panel behind an ordinary bookshelf. A biometric scanner flashed green. The steel door unlocked with a quiet click. Inside was a private dressing suite no one else in the house knew existed. Designer gowns lined one wall. Custom jewelry sparkled beneath soft lights. A collection of luxury watches rested inside velvet cases. In the center of the room stood a garment bag embroidered with a single silver letter V. Giselle unzipped it. A breathtaking midnight black couture gown appeared. Elegant, timeless, powerful. She slipped into the dress and fastened a diamond necklace that had belonged to her grandmother, the original founder of Vane Stafford Capital. A few minutes later, her phone vibrated. The screen displayed one name, Eleanor Brooks, Chief Executive Assistant. "Good evening, Madam Chair," the voice said. "The board members have arrived and every major investor is asking if you will finally reveal your identity tonight." Giselle looked at herself in the mirror. "Tonight they will learn who I am," she replied. "Has Mr. Philip Clayton arrived yet?" Eleanor asked. "He checked in 20 minutes ago. He brought a female guest, not his wife." Giselle showed no surprise. "I expected that. According to our team, he has requested a private meeting with you after your keynote speech. He believes securing Vane Stafford Capital's investment will save Clayton Developments from its financial crises." Giselle smiled faintly. "Interesting. Cancel tomorrow's financing review. Freeze every pending transfer connected to Clayton Developments until I give further instructions." "Yes, Madam Chair. And one more thing. Make sure Mr. Clayton receives a front row seat. I want him to see everything, personally." The call ended. Outside the mansion, a long black limousine rolled through the front gates. The driver stepped out and respectfully opened the rear door. "Welcome, Madam Chair. The gala is ready for your arrival." Across town, Philip adjusted his tuxedo while a glamorous young woman slipped her hand around his arm. Natalie laughed softly. "Do you really think the mysterious billionaire will invest in your company?" Philip smiled confidently. "People invest in winners, and tonight I intend to impress the most powerful woman in the room." Neither of them noticed the giant digital screen above the ballroom entrance. A new announcement had just appeared. "Please welcome our distinguished chairwoman and founder of Vane Stafford Capital. Estimated arrival in 10 minutes." The entire ballroom turned toward the entrance. No one knew that the woman they were waiting to meet had already spent 8 years serving dinner in the very house Philip believed belonged to him. The ballroom buzzed with anticipation. Crystal chandeliers bathed the room in golden light. A string quartet played softly as Monterey's most influential guests exchanged handshakes and business cards. Every conversation revolved around the same question: who was the mysterious chairwoman of Vane Stafford Capital? Philip Clayton straightened his tuxedo and smiled at the investors gathered around him. "My company is entering its most ambitious phase," he said confidently. "With the right strategic partner, we'll redefine luxury developments across the West Coast." The group nodded politely. No one noticed that several executives quietly exchanged uncertain glances. They knew Clayton Developments had recently missed major financial targets. Without fresh investment, the company had only months to survive. Natalie tightened her grip on Philip's arm. "When the chairwoman arrives," she whispered, "make sure she remembers your name." Philip smirked. "She will." At that moment, the lights dimmed. The music stopped. Every guest turned toward the grand staircase overlooking the ballroom. A calm voice echoed through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the founder and chairwoman of Vane Stafford Capital." The massive doors slowly opened. A woman stepped inside. She wore a stunning black gown that shimmered beneath the lights. Diamond earrings caught every flash from the photographers. Her posture was graceful, her expression calm. She walked with the quiet confidence of someone who never needed to prove her worth. The room fell completely silent. Philip's smile disappeared. His face turned pale. Natalie stared without blinking. "That's impossible," she whispered. Fiona Clayton nearly dropped her champagne glass. "Giselle?" The whispers spread through the ballroom. "Isn't that Philip Clayton's wife? I thought she was just a housewife." "No, she's the chairwoman." Giselle continued walking without looking toward Philip. Board members stood the moment she approached. International investors followed. Then the governor. Then the mayor. Within seconds, hundreds of distinguished guests were on their feet, applauding. Philip remained frozen. For the first time in 8 years, he realized he knew almost nothing about the woman he had married. Giselle reached the stage and accepted the microphone. She smiled warmly at the audience. "Good evening." Her voice was steady. "Thank you for joining us tonight." The applause faded. She looked across the ballroom. Her eyes met Philip's for the first time that evening. He took an instinctive step forward. She looked away as though he were a complete stranger. Then she spoke the words that made the entire room hold its breath. "Before we discuss new partnerships, I believe it's time a few long-hidden truths finally came into the light." The ballroom was so quiet that even the sound of cameras clicking seemed loud. Every eye remained fixed on Giselle. She stood at the center of the stage with effortless confidence. For years, she began, people have asked why. Vane Stafford Capital has never revealed the identity of its founder. She paused. The answer is simple. I wanted every business relationship to be built on integrity rather than influence. A ripple of applause moved through the audience. Philip forced a smile. Perhaps he thought she wasn't here to expose him. Perhaps she would keep their marriage private. Then Giselle continued. "Unfortunately, not everyone values integrity." Her gaze settled briefly on Philip before returning to the audience. "Some people build impressive reputations by taking credit for sacrifices they never made." Philip's heartbeat quickened. But the giant screens behind the stage appeared. Photographs from nearly a decade earlier. An old construction site, a tiny office, a young Philip signing his first contract. Standing beside him was Giselle. Not in the background. At the center of every meeting, the audience murmured in surprise. Then another image appeared, a bank transfer authorizing emergency funding that had saved Clayton Developments from bankruptcy during its first year. The signature at the bottom read simply, Giselle Prescott. Another document followed, then another, private investment agreements, property acquisitions, land purchases. Every one of them had been financed through Vane Stafford Capital, without revealing its owner. Philip's face drained of color. "No," he whispered. "That can't be." Across the room, investors began flipping through the digital reports that had just been sent to their tablets. One executive slowly looked toward Philip. "So your company was never self-funded?" Another shook his head. "Every major expansion came from Vane Stafford Capital, and you claimed you built everything alone." Fiona gripped the edge of her chair. "This is some kind of mistake," she muttered. "It has to be." Giselle smiled calmly. "It isn't. For 8 years, I allowed the public to believe my husband's version of our story. I believed loyalty mattered more than recognition. I was wrong." The ballroom remained silent. Then Giselle pressed a small button on the presentation remote. A final document appeared. The deed to the Clayton mansion. Owner, Giselle Prescott. Purchased 6 years earlier through a private holding company. The audience gasped. Philip stared at the screen as if the words might change. "You," he whispered. "You own the house." Giselle finally looked directly at him. "Yet, the home you proudly introduced as your family estate, the offices your company uses, the land your newest development is built on. They have all belonged to me." Philip felt the room closing in around him. Everything he believed he controlled had never truly been his. And Giselle had only revealed the beginning. She looked back toward the audience and spoke one final sentence. "Now, let's discuss whether Clayton Developments deserves to have a future at all." The silence inside the ballroom was unbearable. Philip slowly stood from his chair. His forced smile had completely disappeared. "Giselle," said, trying to laugh, "this has gone far enough. You've made your point. We're husband and wife. Let's discuss this privately." A few minutes earlier, he had looked at her with embarrassment. Now he looked at her with desperation. Giselle's expression never changed. "I asked to stand beside you tonight. You told me I belonged at home washing dishes." The audience exchanged uneasy glances. Philip swallowed hard. "I didn't mean it that way." "No," Giselle asked calmly. "Then perhaps everyone here misunderstood." She pressed another button on the presentation remote. Security footage appeared on the giant screens. The video showed Philip leaving the mansion only hours earlier. Standing beside him was not his wife. It was Natalie. His hand rested comfortably around her waist as they walked to the waiting limousine. A shocked murmur spread across the ballroom. Natalie immediately stepped away from Philip. "This isn't what it looks like," she whispered. Giselle looked at her without anger. "You're right. It's worse." Another image appeared, a reservation record from an exclusive resort. Then photographs of Philip and Natalie, arriving together at luxury hotels over the previous year. Each trip had been charged to Clayton Developments as a business expense. Several board members stared at Philip in disbelief. One director slowly removed his glasses. "You told us those were investor meetings." Philip opened his mouth. No words came. Fiona rushed toward Giselle. "You have no right to humiliate my son like this." Giselle finally faced her. "For 8 years. You humiliated me in my own home. You called me ordinary. You called me worthless. You treated me like unpaid staff. I simply chose not to answer until tonight." Fiona's face turned pale. The ballroom remained completely still. Then one of the company's oldest investors stood up. He looked directly at Philip. "I invested in your business because I believed I could trust the man leading it." He slowly removed the Clayton Developments lapel pin from his jacket. "I was mistaken." One by one other investors quietly followed. Within moments, the applause Philip had expected to receive that evening had become something far more painful. The sound of people walking away from him. Giselle watched in silence. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't celebrating. Justice didn't require revenge spoken in anger. Sometimes the truth was more than enough. The ballroom remained silent. No one dared to speak. Philip stood frozen in the front row, his confidence disappearing. With every passing second, his phone suddenly vibrated. Then again, and again, he glanced at the screen. 10 missed calls. 23 emails. A message from his chief financial officer flashed across the display. "Urgent. Every pending transfer from Vane Stafford Capital has been suspended. Our credit lines are being frozen. Call me immediately." Philip's hands began to shake. "This can't be happening," he whispered. Across the room, Giselle calmly addressed the audience. "Business is built on trust. And trust disappears the moment honesty does." She turned toward the executive board seated beside the stage. "As chairwoman of Vane Stafford Capital, I am officially withdrawing every investment loan guarantee and financial commitment connected to Clayton Developments." The words echoed through the ballroom. Several investors lowered their heads. They had expected a warning, not an execution. Within seconds, another notification appeared on Philip's phone. "Your emergency financing application has been declined." A second message followed. "The acquisition scheduled for next week has been canceled." Then a third. "Board meeting called immediately. Attendance required." Natalie slowly released Philip's arm. She had been smiling all evening. Now she looked terrified. "You told me your company was unstoppable," she whispered. Philip couldn't answer, because for the first time in his career, he had nothing left to say. Across the ballroom, Fiona marched toward the stage. "You can't do this," she shouted. "My son built that company." Giselle met her gaze without anger. Number. He built his reputation. There is a difference. The room fell silent again. Giselle continued. 8 years ago, Clayton Developments was weeks away from bankruptcy. I saved it. I protected it. I believed my husband would someday value loyalty more than pride. She looked at Philip. I was wrong. At that moment, the master of ceremonies approached the stage carrying a sealed envelope. Madam Chair, he said respectfully, the board has signed the resolution. Giselle opened the envelope. She read it once, then looked toward Philip. Effective immediately. Every partnership between Vane Stafford Capital and Clayton Developments is terminated. A loud gasp swept across the ballroom. Philip felt the floor disappear beneath him. Years of ambition. Years of arrogance. Years of pretending he had built an empire alone collapsed in a single sentence. And the night was far from over, because Giselle had one final truth to reveal, a truth that would destroy far more than Philip's business. Philip stood motionless. The applause that had once celebrated his success had been replaced by whispers. Every conversation in the ballroom was about him, not as a visionary, but as a man whose empire had been built on lies. His phone rang again. This time, it was the chairman of Clayton Developments. Philip answered immediately. Sir, I can explain. You've done enough, the chairman interrupted coldly. The board has just held an emergency vote. Philip, his face turned white. What vote? You've been removed as chief executive officer effective immediately. The call ended. Philip stared at the dark screen. 8 years of ambition, gone in seconds. Across the ballroom, reporters rushed toward Giselle. Madam Chair, did you plan tonight's announcement? Were you secretly financing Clayton Developments all these years? Will Vane Stafford Capital acquire the company? Giselle answered calmly. I didn't come here to destroy a business. I came here to stop rewarding dishonesty. The room erupted into applause. Meanwhile, Natalie quietly picked up her designer handbag. She glanced at Philip one last time. I didn't sign up for bankruptcy, she said. Then she walked away without looking back. Philip reached after her. Natalie, wait. She disappeared into the crowd. Fiona hurried to her son. We'll fix this, she whispered desperately. We'll hire lawyers. We'll challenge the contracts. Giselle overheard every word. There is nothing to challenge, she said. Every document has been verified by independent auditors. The ownership records have existed for years. Fiona's shoulders slumped. For the first time, she realized there was no escape. Everything Giselle had revealed was true. Giselle stepped down from the stage. Guests moved aside, forming a path without anyone asking them to. Some smiled. Others nodded respectfully. Several thanked her for protecting the integrity of the business community. Philip watched her approach. His eyes filled with regret. Giselle, please. I made terrible mistakes. Give me one chance to make things right. She stopped only a few feet away. Her voice was calm. I gave you chances for 8 years. You wasted every one of them. She turned and walked toward the grand ballroom doors. Just before leaving, she paused. Without looking back, she spoke one final sentence. Tomorrow morning, you'll discover that losing your company was only the beginning. Then she walked into the night. Behind her, Philip finally understood that some doors once closed never open again. The sunrise over Monterey was beautiful. For Philip Clayton, it was the beginning of the worst day of his life. He barely slept. The moment he walked into the headquarters of Clayton Developments, he sensed something was wrong. Employees who once rushed to greet him quietly looked away. Conversations stopped as he passed. His executive assistant met him outside his office. Her eyes were filled with sympathy. I'm sorry, Mr. Clayton. Your access card has been deactivated. Philip frowned. There must be a mistake. There isn't. Before she could say anything else, 2 uniformed security officers approached. One of them held out a small envelope. Mr. Clayton, we're here to escort you from the building. Philippa's voice rose. This is my company. The officer remained calm. It isn't anymore. The board's decision became effective at midnight. Philip looked around desperately. Not a single executive came to defend him. Not one. Meanwhile, across town, Giselle sat in the top-floor boardroom of Vane Stafford Capital. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows as directors applauded her. One of the senior board members smiled. "Madam Chair, every major shareholder has approved the acquisition." Another director slid a folder across the table. "Clayton Developments is officially under the control of Vane Stafford Capital." Giselle signed the final page without hesitation. "There will be no layoffs," she said. "The employees did nothing wrong. We will protect every honest worker." The directors nodded in agreement. News of the decision spread within minutes. Business networks called it the fastest corporate takeover in the city's history. Outside the former Clayton headquarters, reporters surrounded Philip. "Mr. Clayton, is it true you no longer own the company? Did your wife secretly finance your success? Do you have any comment?" Philip said nothing. He simply walked away. Later that afternoon, he returned to the mansion. He believed that at least it was still his home. As he reached the front door, the electronic lock flashed red. "Access denied." A property manager stepped outside carrying a neatly sealed envelope. "Mr. Clayton," she said politely, "Mrs. Prescott asked me to give this to you." With trembling hands, Philip opened it. Inside was a single key, the key to his small downtown apartment, the one he had owned before marrying Giselle. Beneath it was a handwritten note. "Everything you brought into this marriage has been returned to you. Everything else was always mine." For the first time in years, Philip realized he had confused privilege with ownership. And now, he had neither. The small apartment felt colder than Philip remembered. The peeling paint, the outdated furniture, the silence. Only 2 days earlier, he had believed he owned one of the most admired business empires in Monterey. Now all he possessed fit inside 3 cardboard boxes. His phone buzzed. For a brief moment, hope returned. Perhaps Giselle was calling. Instead, it was another news alert. Vane Stafford Capital announces new leadership for Clayton Developments. Company shares rise to record highs. Philip slowly lowered the phone. Even without him, the company was thriving. Across town, Giselle walked through the headquarters of Clayton Developments. Employees greeted her with genuine smiles. Many thanked her for protecting their jobs. One elderly accountant approached her with tears in his eyes. "Mrs. Prescott, I have worked here for 26 years. I thought we would all lose everything. You saved our families." Giselle smiled warmly. "You earned your place here. Honest people should never pay for someone else's pride." The employees applauded. For the first time, the building felt less like a corporation and more like a family. That afternoon, Philip requested one final meeting. To everyone's surprise, Giselle agreed. They met in a quiet garden overlooking the ocean, the same place where Philip had proposed 8 years earlier. He looked older, defeated. His expensive suits had been replaced by a simple jacket. His confidence had disappeared. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I love success so much. I forgot to love the person who gave me the chance to achieve it." Giselle listened without interrupting. When he finished, she spoke gently. "I never wanted your money. I never wanted your titles. I only wanted respect." Philip lowered his head. "I know. It is too late, is it not?" Giselle nodded. "Some things can be repaired, but trust is not one of them." She reached into her handbag and placed a sealed envelope on the bench between them. Philip looked at it. "What is this?" "The divorce papers. I signed them this morning." He closed his eyes. The reality finally settled in. He had not lost his marriage at the gala. He had lost it years earlier, one cruel word at a time. Giselle stood. "I truly hope you become a better man, but that journey no longer includes me." Without waiting for an answer, she walked away. Philip remained on the bench, watching the woman he had underestimated for 8 long years disappear into the sunset. This time, he knew she would never come back. 6 months later, the city barely remembered Philip Clayton as the celebrated businessman he had once been. Newspapers now described him as a cautionary tale, the man who had mistaken borrowed success for his own. Meanwhile, Vane Stafford Capital reached new heights. Under Giselle's leadership, the company funded children's hospitals, affordable housing projects, and scholarships for young entrepreneurs. The employees of Clayton Developments flourished under the new management. For the first time in years, the company was admired not only for its profits, but for its integrity. One autumn evening, Giselle stood on the balcony of the restored waterfront hotel where everything had changed. The annual charity gala had returned. This year, she welcomed every guest personally. There were no secrets, no hidden identity, only quiet confidence. As the evening began, the master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the woman whose vision has transformed both our business community and countless lives. The ballroom erupted in applause. Giselle smiled with gratitude. She accepted the microphone. A year ago, I believed success meant protecting people who refused to value me. I was wrong. The greatest investment we can ever make is in people who respect honesty, kindness, and loyalty. The audience rose to its feet. The applause lasted for several minutes. Among the guests was the elderly accountant whose job she had saved. Young scholarship recipients, doctors from the hospitals her company had funded, families who now had homes because of her generosity. They weren't applauding her wealth. They were applauding her character. As the celebration ended, Giselle stepped outside onto the terrace overlooking the ocean. The waves rolled gently beneath the moonlight. She took a deep breath. For the first time in many years, she felt completely free. She had lost a husband who never appreciated her, but she had found something far more valuable: her dignity, her peace, her future. Sometimes the greatest revenge is not making someone suffer. It is proving that their cruelty never had the power to stop you from becoming everything you were meant to be. And as Giselle smiled at the horizon, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Her next chapter would be written not by betrayal, but by hope. 1 year later, the grand ballroom was filled once again. But this time, no one whispered about the mysterious billionaire behind Vane Stafford Capital. Everyone already knew her name: Giselle Prescott, the woman who had rebuilt a company, protected thousands of jobs, and turned pain into purpose. As she walked through the ballroom, people greeted her with genuine respect, not because she was wealthy, but because she had earned their admiration. During the evening, the host smiled. Tonight, we'd like to honor someone whose generosity has changed countless lives. The audience stood before her name was even announced. A standing ovation echoed throughout the room. Giselle accepted the award with quiet grace. She looked across the crowd. I once believed that staying silent made me strong, she said. But I learned that real strength comes from knowing your worth. If someone constantly makes you feel small, walk away. If someone only values you when they need you, walk away. And if someone mistakes your kindness for weakness, show them that kindness and strength can exist together. The audience erupted into applause. Later that evening, Giselle stepped outside onto the terrace overlooking the ocean. The cool breeze carried the sound of laughter from inside. Her assistant approached with a smile. Madam Chair, every project on this year's list has been fully funded. The children's hospital is complete. The scholarship program has doubled, and every employee at Clayton Developments has received a profit-sharing bonus. Giselle smiled. That's the legacy I wanted. As they spoke, a black car slowly drove past the hotel. Inside sat Philip. He looked toward the brightly lit ballroom. For a brief moment, their eyes met through the glass. He didn't wave. He didn't speak. He simply nodded. A quiet acknowledgement of everything he had lost, and everything she had become. The car continued down the road until it disappeared into the night. Giselle turned back toward the celebration. She no longer carried anger. She no longer carried regret. The past had taught her painful lessons, but it no longer controlled her future. She walked back inside where friends, colleagues, and grateful families welcomed her with smiles. The doors closed behind her. Not as an ending, but as the beginning of a life built on respect, honesty, and peace. Because the greatest victory was never owning the mansion, the company, or the empire. It was finally realizing she had always owned herself. 3 years later, the skyline of Monterey had changed. New hospitals stood where abandoned buildings had once crumbled. Affordable homes filled neighborhoods that had been forgotten for decades. Scholarship recipients had become doctors, engineers, teachers, and entrepreneurs. Every project carried the same quiet promise, built with purpose. At the center of it all was Vane Stafford Capital, not as the richest company in the city, but as the most respected. Inside the company's headquarters, Giselle stood before a wall covered with photographs. Children smiling outside a new hospital, families receiving the keys to their first homes, employees celebrating years of service. Those pictures meant more to her than any balance sheet ever could. Her assistant entered with a small envelope. "Madam Chair," she said softly, "this arrived this morning." Giselle opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. It had no signature, only one sentence. "Thank you for proving that kindness is never weakness." She smiled. That was all the recognition she had ever wanted. Later that evening, she returned to the waterfront hotel where her life had changed forever. The ballroom looked almost exactly as it had on the night of the gala. But this time, there were no secrets, no humiliation, no fear, only laughter. Standing on the stage, Giselle looked across the room. "I used to believe that revenge meant making someone suffer," she said. "But life taught me something better. The greatest victory is building a future that no one can take away." The audience rose to its feet. Their applause wasn't for a billionaire. It was for a woman who had refused to let betrayal define her. As the lights dimmed and the evening came to an end, Giselle stepped outside. The ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and fresh flowers. She looked toward the horizon and smiled. The mansion, the company, the fortune, none of them had been her greatest achievement. Her greatest achievement was becoming a woman who never again needed anyone else's approval to know her worth. And with that, she quietly walked forward into the next chapter of her life, not seeking revenge, not looking back, only embracing the peace she had earned. The end. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more emotional revenge stories, family drama, and unforgettable endings. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next story. See you in the next video.